Hey, everybody, welcome to Dad's Den of Pop Culture. Well, October, the spooky month of horror, is now over. But now we've lapsed into November and we're getting into the fall, and it's getting colder and it's getting darker earlier. And in some parts of the country, you're getting all the wonderful autumn leaves on the ground and maybe starting to get some flurries of snow, which means it's still a good time for spooky stories and for gothic romance. And that is what I bring to you today, ladies and gentlemen. A little review of a cheap little paperback called Victoria Winters. Now, this is part of a Dark Shadows series of books. Dark Shadows is a gothic soap opera that premiered in 1966. Used to play at around 4 o'clock in the afternoon, which gave it access to an awesome demographic, and that is teenagers getting home from school, and younger than teenagers too. And they became huge proponents of this show, really made it legendary. It's a really fun show. You can find it on Tubi at the moment. It's live on tape, so you get to see some flubs. You get to see boom mics getting into shots and flies on people's noses while they're trying to act. And it can be a little corny and a little goofy and quite dramatic. But it's a really fun show. It started off very much as a gothic romance, a gothic sort of romantic story. And then gradually got more and more supernatural elements added to it. And of course, the big element that really made it explode was Barnabas the vampire. Barnabas made the show truly legendary. Now, the books were first published starting in December of 1966, so really just about 6 months after the show premiered. They're written by Marilyn Ross, which is actually a pseudonym for W.E.D. Oh, I just lost the author's name. Well, that's perfect. I'll put it in the description below. But he was a prolific author, Canadian. Started writing when he was about 50 years old and wrote many, many, many paperbacks. 33 Dark Shadows paperbacks were written, all by the same author. They actually kept being published until March of 72. So for about almost a year after the show went off the air. Now, I have quite a few, not all, mind you, but quite a few of the books. Ta-da! Got these all at an antique store one time. They had a good price on them, so I thought, oh, that'll be fun. My wife and I were watching the series at the time. Now, the books do not necessarily have anything to do with the continuity of the TV series, which in a way makes sense. The TV series is a soap opera. It was on 5 times a week. There's really no gaps in the story that they're telling. Just one show leads right into the next. So you can't really say, well, this one is set between this episode and that. No, there is no time between the episodes for the entire series, which is why there are, over 1,000 episodes of the show. But in a way, they actually do work with the show's continuity. Because in the later episodes, they introduce the concept of parallel time. Essentially, and this may really cause fear in some people these days, the idea of a multiverse. Parallel time is essentially like parallel Earths. Other dimensions where where you have maybe the same characters, but slightly different from what we know. Things went a little different way. And they start sliding through different parallel times as the show goes on. And they were looking for ways to sort of jazz things up and do some different stuff. Now, Victoria Winters is the second book in the series. And this is when the show was still very much in the Gothic romantic vein, which is primarily what the author worked in. Now, you'll notice this is the 10th printing of this book, which that should tell you something in and of itself. So this was, I'm sorry, I got that wrong. This is the 7th printing from April of 69. First printing was March of 67. So we have Barnabas on the cover of this book. Barnabas did not exist as a character when this book was written, and in fact was not on the cover of the first printing. Very often the characters on the covers don't really have much to do with the story inside, but it was a way to sell the books, and that was really what this was all about. There was a great deal of marketing for Dark Shadows for a time. It was an unbelievable phenomenon in entertainment that didn't ultimately really last that long. But as a soap opera, they got a lot of storylines in. It's a really fun show, and I highly suggest it. So when I bought these, I decided, okay, I'm going to try to read one every October. I'll just pull one off, off the shelf and give it a read. Now, initially, I was doing it almost at random, so I decided just in the last year, I finally got them organized in order that they were published. And so I'm like, all right, let's start at the first one that I have. Obviously, not the first book, which is called Dark Shadows. But we'll start with this one. It's not a bad book. Now, these were sort of cheap paperbacks. They were put out at a pretty rapid pace. And again, the author wrote, I think, somewhere in the neighborhood of 260 books. But it's not a bad story. And even though it's not necessarily within the same continuity as Dark Shadows, there are some elements in it that make me wonder if it was written using an earlier series Bible than what was finally decided on. Because there's a character mentioned in this, a character named Ernest Collins, who does not show up in the television show. And he's supposed to be a sibling of two characters who are very prominent, Roger Collins and his sister Elizabeth Stoddard. Elizabeth Stoddard being sort of the mistress of Collinwood, of the manor. And he's supposed to be a violinist who's on tour, who has some kind of relationship with Vicky. But interestingly enough, in the book, he really doesn't play into it that much. She has some suspicions that maybe he's involved with some kind of a crime, but he's never there. He's somewhere else. And you go, you don't really need that character. You really don't need him. Could he have been in an earlier version of the show where they were going to have another sibling? I don't know. So what's the story about? Well, ultimately, a group of visitors come to Collinwood. It's a man from Elizabeth Stoddard's past. And he has two daughters. And one of them is very sick, and they need a place that they can stay. And in among all of this, Victoria she sees what she believes is a ghost of a woman who she discovers had died at Collinwood some years prior. There's an element of Dark Shadows that is a thing called Widow's Hill. And essentially it's a cliff overlooking the sea where several widows have jumped to their death. Now one of them, and this is more important for the show, is a woman named Josette. And that becomes, intertwined with the story of Barnabas. But apparently this other woman had done this as well. But there were some people who wondered if she was not, in fact, murdered. So we have this, these sort of legends of a possible murder, and she starts seeing this ghost, and we have these visitors, and they're not that pleasant, and it all kind of gets wrapped up into what's going on. Is there some deeper mystery, some dark secret in Collinwood? Um, and it reads pretty well. I mean, it's a quick read, but it's well written for what it is. At the end of pretty much every chapter, you have sort of the mystery gets a little bit deeper. And I did find myself over the course of the book, wondering, okay, well, trying to figure it out. And I like mysteries like that. I had a pretty good, elaborate idea of what was going to happen, who the true villain was going to be, and I was completely wrong by the end of it. It wasn't what I thought at all. And in fact, the ending was a little bit anticlimactic for me. I wasn't in love with it, but it did work and it tracked and it made sense. But not a bad little read if you're just looking for some pleasure reading something really quick. But I think the thing that probably made these books a hit back in the day, and again with 7 printings, they had to be doing pretty well, was the fact that we're talking about the 60s, and we don't have DVDs and VHS and what have you, and it's a soap opera, which means you also don't have, most likely, reruns. Although I don't know, maybe it was so popular that they did something like that somewhere along the line, but you couldn't revisit these shows. And it's similar to this series of novels, and I'll be doing these one of these days too. James Blish's adaptations of Star Trek episodes. Interesting for one, because they often worked off of an earlier script than the one they shot with. So you'll get interesting little details, sometimes supplied by Blish, but sometimes maybe you kind of go, oh, I see, they were going to do this, but they decided to do this instead. In fact, a couple of the episodes in here end very differently than they do on the TV series. But the main thing with these was, well, you couldn't necessarily watch these episodes again, until it went into reruns. You couldn't. And this was a way to revisit. And so these books were also a way to revisit a show that you loved and characters that you loved. And it gives the writer an opportunity to do some things with the characters that they didn't do in the series. And I found as I read them that you could sort of hear the dialogue in the voice of the actors playing the characters, which is a good sign that it's actually pretty well written. It fits. You don't come away going, wow, that character's really different here than they are in the TV show. With maybe the only one that seemed a little bit different was Elizabeth Stoddard, but not much. She's kind of a basket case, and especially in the earlier episodes of the show. So Victoria Winter's second book in the Dark Shadows series. I'm going to be reading and reviewing these over time. Probably try to maybe do 1 or 2 of them each October, and maybe into November, until I get through the stack. So look forward to more of these. But you can pick this up. It does exist out there. I think I saw it on Amazon. You could probably find it in antique stores, thrift stores, used bookstores. I'm sure, in fact, I'm positive there's some on eBay, because I was looking into, maybe what it would take to complete the series. But they are decent books. You have a prolific author, but prolific because he wrote books that worked, that caught your attention, that drew you in, that and these are kind of mysteries. And as mysteries, yeah, you're wondering, trying to pick up the clues and figure out how it works. Can't complain about that. So if you're just looking for some pleasure reading, and if you enjoy Dark Shadows, or maybe you're getting into Dark Shadows, not a bad way to go. And the books will not ruin the TV show for you, because they're sort of in their own little version of parallel time. All the characters, the setting, but it doesn't necessarily relate to what goes on in the TV series. And I'll try to do a review of the series at a later date. I'm trying to figure out the best way to do it, because it is so long, that I might break it down into the major storylines that they did. There was the initial sort of gothic romance, Wuthering Heights kind of thing. There was the mystery of Elizabeth Stoddard. There was Roger Collins' wife. There was then Barnabas. And from Barnabas, we got, well, anyways, I won't go into all that. But hopefully, we'll be able to cover Dark Shadows a little bit more as we go. It's a fantastic piece of American pop culture. And I highly suggest it. And listen, the shows can be a little bit goofy, does not ruin them for you. My wife and I love the show, and we laugh at some of the episodes because of little errors and little mistakes and how dramatic it can be. But we don't laugh at it like out of mockery. It's kind of the way you watch Brady Bunch. It's fun, but it's also kind of goofy, and so you get both of those elements from it. So there you go. Victoria Winters by Marilyn Ross. Great little paperback novel in the Dark Shadows series. Hey, we're in that fall period, right? Maybe want to get under a blanket with some, hot cup of cocoa, hot cider, by the fireplace, read a little gothic mystery novel. And these might fill the bill for you. Well, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please put a like on there. It really helps with the algorithm. If you enjoy these videos and the pop culture stuff that I cover, please think about subscribing and maybe sharing with a friend. In the meantime, God bless all of you. Please be kind to one another and try to have some fun out there. And I will see you next time on Dad's Den of Pop Culture.